And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. David Hinds here with you, of course, on another busy day in Guyana, another busy day of politics in Guyana. I'd like to welcome everyone down to Politics 101, whether you're joining us here in Guyana or you're further afield. I'd like to welcome all those of you who are joining us from uh, French Guyana, those of you who are joining us from Suriname, those of you who are joining us from the wider Caribbean. Sandra, welcome. Welcome down to Politics 101. My sister Denise Booker, welcome down to Politics 101. And William Koja, Egerton David, some of the regulars, Jennifer, Bob, welcome down to Politics 101. If you're joining us from North America, if you're joining us from North America, whether it's in the United States of America or Canada, welcome to Politics 101. If you're in some other part of the United States of America, Boston, Washington, D.C., Maryland area, New York, of course, Brooklyn and Queens and Long Island, New Jersey, welcome to Politics 101. And of course, our good friends from the United Kingdom, England, Ireland, Scotland. Welcome to Politics 101. I see GT Road Gal is here. Barbara, welcome down to Politics 101. Patricia Kisoon, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from there in the Caribbean, in Barbados, in Jamaica, St. Kitts, Nevis, and Grenada, they're having an election, I think, tomorrow. Tomorrow. I think they're having, yes, tomorrow they're having an election in Grenada. Interesting to see what happens in that election. Anyone from Grenada, please let's hear from you. Election in Grenada, of course, the last two elections. Grenada, as like Barbados, it has no opposition. The ruling party, the New National Party of Dr. Keith Mitchell, won all the seats at the last election. This election promised to be interesting because there is a new leader of the opposition, NDC, the National Democratic Congress, a young man, and the NDC is hoping to do better than they did the last time. So we'll be watching that election tomorrow night in Grenada to see what happens. If you're joining us from Antigua and Barbuda, lots of Guyanese there, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, of course. If you're in Montserrat, um, welcome down to Politics 101. Last night we had quite a show, and we had a full house last night. All the seats were taken, and we had, you know, 30-40% more than our capacity. And so welcome down to Politics 101. Another busy day in Guyana. There are a couple of protests around Georgetown. Today, the family and close friends of Quindon Bacchus brought their protest to Georgetown. They were in front of the police headquarters at Eve Leary, and later on they went in front of the Ministry of Home Affairs. We went down there, we gave some solidarity in both locations. Again, it's always good to be on the ground and to be with real people engaging the issues that affect them. So please please share the link. If each of you shares the link, then we are going to be doing much better in terms of filling up the seats for tonight's show. We plan to have Mr. Vincent Alexander on tonight to talk about what's happening in GCOM. We touched on it last night. Vincent is a commissioner. He will give us all the inside perspective, the insider perspective. So we expect Vincent to join us later on. But I was saying those protests in Georgetown today, the family and close friends of Quindon Bacchus came down to Georgetown. They were in front of the Evilary. They were in front of the Home Affairs Ministry, Mr. Robeson Ben's ministry, and some of us were out there giving them solidarity. The press was there, and so forth. So they're continuing that protest, and they brought it to Georgetown. And then across town, in front of the office of the president, the PNC, as I understand it, they had a protest there, protesting against the revelations in the Vice News expose on Sunday, and they're calling for the ouster of Vice President Barrett Jack Dio, and some of the PNC leaders were out there. I saw Christopher Jones out there. I saw Sherrod Duncan out there, and a few others. So things are picking up. Things are picking up. People are out there. Member of Parliament, Tabitha Sarbo Ali was out there. So things are picking up. Welcome everybody. Welcome Sharon, Albert Morgan from there in the quarantine coast. Welcome my brother Courtney October. Welcome Joseph Edwards K. Watson, welcome Nandia Seaford, Terry Ann Grenville from West Bobbies, somewhere out there in New Jersey, watching from New Jersey via West Coast Bobbies. The Grenville, I think they're from Belladrum, El Dorado area there. Welcome to Politics 101. Carol is joining us from Linden. Welcome to Politics 101. Quite a packed day today in Georgetown. And as I said, it was good to see people out there letting their voices be heard. A movement has to start somewhere. It has to start somewhere. You can't, as I keep saying over and over and over again, you cannot script a resistance movement. A resistance movement has to come out of the bowels of the people, and then it begins to take form. And those of us who are not on the ground, we can lend support, as we have been doing. Yuri Westmus of the political family, the Westmus family, Rory Westmus, one of the founder leaders of the People's Progressive Party, Yuri's dad, David Westmus, long-standing activist of the PPP, worked with Dr. Jagan, I think as his research assistant for years. And Dr. Nigel Westmus, WPA, is Yuri's brother. Political family, going way back to the 1940s, Welcome, Kenneth DeFlormont from Maryland. The DeFlormont family, as I indicated the other night, I know them quite well. Miss Downer, she's watching from New York. Welcome, everyone. The important thing about these shows is that if it's not for the audience, we would have no show, right? So it's a two-way thing. The show is dependent on an audience, and once you have an audience, then you have a show. I can be here chatting, talking, And if there's no audience, there's no show. Very good, very good, very good, very good, very good. So we are beginning to see some boots on the ground. We are beginning to see some boots on the ground. Deborah, Miss Leach, she's watching from Bobby's. I assume West Coast Bobby's. Welcome down. We are building a movement, and you build a movement by starting at some point. And unfortunately, this police killing of young Black men is something that is very disconcerting, and it's animating people. Welcome, Miss Casey, Brenda Casey, Donna Holder. Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Joseph is watching from Boston, up there in Massachusetts. New Amsterdam. Deborah is saying she's from New Amsterdam. Yes, it's often we forget about New Amsterdam, our second most important township. I think Linden. I don't know if the Linden population has gone past New Amsterdam, but New Amsterdam has always been our second most important township. Thank you very much and welcome, Lawrence and Kevin Benjamin. My sister Linda Campbell is watching from New Jersey via Buxton back damn side. Matthew James, welcome to Politics 101. The big news is that today there were two protests in Georgetown. One, continuing to protest the murder of the young man from Golden Grove, and the other protesting against Mr. Jack Dio, Mr. Suing Guyana. You know, one of the things about that Jack Dio, Mr. Sue thing is that you're exposed with your man, Dr. Jeffrey called him the bag man last night, Mr. Sue. And the most you can tell us, I'm going to sue Mr. Sue and put Mr. Sue out of my house. If I were caught, or if any opposition person was caught doing a Mr. Sue, Jack Dio would say, lock them up, call in the police. You are caught Mr. Suing, and instead of talking about calling in the police, you are telling us, I will put him out from my house. That's your business if you're putting him in from your house. Unless Mr. Sue living at or renting a house from Mr. Jack Dio is part of this elaborate government involvement, then whether you put him out or not is not our business. But if he's living as you as part of this scheme, the Sue scheme, and you put him out, then it makes sense. But if he's not part of it, then it doesn't make sense. But you put him out. Welcome, everyone. Welcome down to Politics 101. I see Shondell Headley, my cousin from Buxton. You know, the whole of Buxton that says me cousin, but some people are my real cousins. Shondell is my real cousin from Buxton, Rushdam, Friendship, whatever you call it. Dennis McKenzie. When the police kill the black man, it is fine with the PPP. But when an Indian, when it's an Indian, the police face charges. You're making very important observations. Very important observation. Welcome to Politics 101. I'm coming to you from Buxton Village, East Coast, Demerara. You know, the Buxtoners always say their village is the best village in the world, you know, and all that kind of stuff and so on. I'm saying nice people in Buxton. I have to say that I'm a Buxtonian myself, but Guyanese are nice people. the rest of Guyana is as important as Buxton. You all Buxtonians, don't put me out of your village because I say the other villages are as important as Buxton. So we had those protests in Georgetown today, and I'm saying, here is Mr. Jagdeo. Got caught. He's caught. He got caught. He got caught. He didn't know the people were taping him. And he basically talk out. And Mr. Sue talk out. At some point, I think Jagdeo realized the possibility is that he might be compromised. So he said, all right, go and deal with Mr. Sue. This thing is not a movie. This is the real deal happening in front of our eyes. And the point is this. The Americans have pursued Jagdeo and the PPP, and they have exposed them in pursuit of their own interests. The Americans want to decrease the influence of the Chinese around the world, and in particular in the Caribbean. The Chinese are the biggest external investor in the Caribbean. And in Guyana, where the action is right now, the Chinese want to have an influence. As part of the US foreign policy, Mr. Biden has said that under his watch, he will decrease the Chinese economic influence. And since Guyana is important to the Americans, they want to focus on Guyana, I think, as part of that larger strategy of decreasing the Chinese influence. And so therefore, they've gone off after the government to put pressure on the Guyana government to disengage from the Chinese. And so they've exposed the PPP government. I'm arguing that that Vice News thing had the blessings of US power. It had the blessings of the US establishment. Whether it's the political establishment or the economic establishment, it had the blessings of the US establishment. So by exposing the PPP, by shaming the PPP, the US is then going to use that as leverage to get the PPP to disengage from the Chinese. No, as far as we are concerned in Guyana, we have to take advantage of the expose of the United States. They have exposed Jagdeo not to help us. They have exposed Jagdeo to help themselves, but we can help ourselves by taking advantage of that expose. Now, as Guyanese, we know that the PPP has been engaging in that kind of thing for a long time. Professor Clive Thomas of the WPA called it the criminalization of the state. Whereas there has been a fusion of the state and the government and criminal elements. We saw that going right back to 2002. So when you have a criminalized state, it means, therefore, that the government does not function as a normal government. Under normal circumstances, who looks after foreign trade? You have to go through the procurement commission for sure. Well, there's no procurement commission. The PPP refuses to set that up. But there's always a foreign direct investment desk at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's the Ministry of Trade. It is through those entities that you engage in contracts and foreign direct investment, whether it's China or Russia, wherever it is. What that expose has shown is that Mr. Alexander seems to be having some difficulty um, in getting in to the program. Um, uh, uh, Mr. Alexander seemed to be having some difficulty getting in to the program, and we have to correct that. We have to correct that and to make sure that he gets in to the program. And I have to make sure that I give him the right link to come into the program. Um, we're going to fix that. We are going to fix that to make sure that Mr. Alexander, Mr. Vincent Alexander, comes in. Comes in. Mr. Alexander comes in to the program. Let's yes, I see where the problem is. I see where the problem is. I see the problem. I think we have corrected the problem there. I think we've corrected the problem there. Bear with me for a moment. Bear with me for a moment as we BJP WNV D3 D. Yes, I think we've sorted out Mr. Alexander there. So if you are doing trade, you go through those institutions. So what we have is Mr. Jagdew operating as though he is a ministry, and that Mr. Su and others are working for him. So what we have is a parallel government operating there, a parallel government. And that is extremely dangerous. That is extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. And that story is an ongoing story. We have to continue to deal with it because it is taking Guyana to dangerous places. Now, let's look at this election thing, which Vincent is going to talk about, and GCOM, where the opposition commissioners have asked GCOM to do an internal review of the elections. An internal review. Not a commission of inquiry. Not to tell us who won the election and who lost the election, but to review what happened during the election at GCOM, to see whether GCOM's system worked, where it worked, and where it didn't work. Any institution in any country engages in reviews. Wherever you work, there is a review. And GCOM, which is an important institution, an institution that is responsible for overseeing elections. Elections are important. It is through elections that we have governments. It is through elections that we change governments. And the institution that is responsible for these elections should be carrying out periodic reviews to determine whether the systems are working or not working. And the Madam Chair has told us that if GCOM were to carry out a review, it would be encroaching on the powers of the court. Not true. The very court said to GCOM during the 5 months that if you see anything wrong in carrying out your job, you have the power to change it. And GCOM has used that power. But whenever the situation becomes untenable as far as the PPP is concerned, Madam Chair has sought refuge under this business that GCOM is not a court of law. GCOM is not a court of law, that is true. But GCOM is responsible for overseeing our elections. And GCOM has the authority under the Elections Amendment Act and the Representation of the People's Act. They have that authority to engage in their own internal review. The court said that, the Chief Justice said that. The Chief Justice said that. And so for the Madam Chair to tell us that GCOM doesn't have that power, it's misleading. It's misleading. It's misleading. In the first place, she is saying that the commissioners ask for some investigation. No, what they ask for is a review. And she's prepared, she says, to rely on a report from the CEO. The present CEO was not there during the election. The present CEO, we know, is partial to the PPP. The present CEO is going to give them a report that they want. And they're going to give that report to the Commission of Inquiry that they've just set up. So they're playing games at GCOM. It's no accident that the PPP has sought to control GCOM. As soon as they came into power, they start to lock up people at GCOM, lock up the CEO, charge him, lock up the deputy CEO, charge her, lock up other workers there, charge them, remove them from GCOM, end their contract, and then they put their own people in GCOM. So they're controlling GCOM. They're controlling GCOM. They're controlling GCOM. And They're controlling GCOM because they want to control the election process. You ask for a new voters list, they object to that. You ask for a review of the election, they object to that. But the government is having, or so they're telling us, a commission of inquiry into the election. And GCOM, the body that is responsible for elections, GCOM is saying it cannot do a simple review of the election. Something is radically wrong. We're hoping that Mr. Alexander will come in. We're having some difficulty. Mr. Alexander, if you're hearing me, the last link is the right link. The last link is the right link. If you're hearing me, Mr. Alexander, the last link that I sent you is the correct link to come in. Mr. Alexander, like I said, we had some confusion with the link. So I think we have sorted that out. If you're hearing me, Mr. Alexander, the last link that I sent you is the correct link. Are you still having some difficulty? Let me know. Let me know. So that's what's happening there at GCOM. And that's what we're going to talk to Vincent Alexander about. Here is Mr. Alexander. Here is Mr. Alexander. I think he is ready for us. Good night to you, Mr. Alexander.
Good evening.
And sorry for the technical mix-up. Instead of StreamYard, I had StreamYard. That was what the problem was. But you made it on. How are things?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad.
If you can lower the phone or the computer a little, because some of your head is being cut off.
Is that better?
A little, if you can get it down a little bit more.
I didn't get you.
All right, good. You're good there. You're good there. You're good there.
Good.
All right. So let's get straight into the meat of the matter. The chairman of the commission has said that GCOM is not a court of law. And so GCOM is not going to be able to facilitate a review. As I understand it, you and your brother commissioners asked for a review of the elections, not an inquiry, a commission of inquiry. All right? Not a petition. You asked for a review. Am I correct?
You're quite correct.
And explain the difference between a review and a commission of inquiry, which the Madam Chair seems to be suggesting that you all want more than a review, and that GCOM is not a court of law. So if you can explain for us the difference between a review, or explain to us what you mean by a review.
Let me answer the question. Our concern is that a lot of what occurred at the elections has been queried, has been contentious, and has suggested that GCOM did not deliver on its job. What we have asked for is a review of the conduct of those elections, so that in that review we can see what went wrong and how what went wrong went wrong. We are not concerned with fingering individuals. We are concerned with addressing the GCOM's operations, the elections, identifying if there were things that went wrong and what were the systemic flaws that would cause those things to go wrong. Our objective being that the identification of those systemic flaws will allow us to rectify our system for future elections. This is separate and apart from what the law provides for in the Constitution under Articles 162 and 163, where the law provides for a determination of the results based on complaints. That's not our concern, the determination of the result. Our concern is, were there things that went wrong that can be corrected? So what the chairperson did is what I call, she built straw houses. She first of all said that we can't do this review you're calling for because that's the function of the court on the petition. But as I just said, what we're asking for has nothing to do with what a petition does. A petition determines if the results were proper or improper. That's what a petition does. And it can reverse the results. So she said, look, you guys are asking for a petition for what the petition should be for. And it's not within our competence. That's a straw house, because we did not ask for that. She then went to the other extreme and said, look, what we can do is a review, but that review has to be focused on the report of the chief elections officer. Now, again, we did not ask for that. We've asked for a review where we can make independent individuals who will then go through the operations that occur and based on that, make recommendations if there are flaws. And our concern is not merely about the elections. We are also concerned about before the elections and after the elections, what occurred. Because the issue of the voters list and its excessive numbers is also an issue to be reviewed in comparison to information that was floated during the elections, after the elections, which showed that there was impersonation. So those are the issues. How did it happen? How did it occur? How did we allow impersonation? What can we do in the future to ensure there's no impersonation? Those are the kinds of things that we are looking at, attempting to identify systemic flaws, and on that basis, making recommendations for the protection of our electoral system.
And I would imagine that you all would have spent time in GCOM meetings giving that kind of lucid explanation about what your intention was. Have you engaged in that kind of meticulous explanation of your request?
Well, let me say two things about that. This matter we raised as far back as February. It's nothing new. And I reserve the right after her pronouncement to respond. And my response will include references to minutes where we made the claim what we were asking for. But let me fast forward. We have since submitted a written motion to the Commission, clearly identifying what is it we're asking for and referring her ruling and showing that on one hand, what she said is not what we asked for. On the other hand, we agree that it can be reviewed, except that it does not be focused on a report of the chief elections officer. In both instances, given that the chief elections officer is before the court, one cannot expect him to come forward now and to provide evidence in any other inquiry. So that even the COI which they have called for will be faced with that problem. Chief elections officer can simply say, I'm not involved with that. We have before the court and the court determines when I'm right or wrong. So we have already tabled a motion at last Tuesday's meeting. We've asked for it in writing. You'll have that by tomorrow the latest. And that motion will make it very clear that we are not asking for what she said we asked for and what she ruled on, because her ruling was a straw house that she constructed and pulled down. Nor are we asking for a review that involves a report of the Chief Elections Officer. We are asking for an independent body of people to come in and to look at GCOM's system, how it operated during the course of the elections, and where things may have gone wrong. To ask for that kind of review is not unprecedented. We have had consultants coming in the past, not at look at the electoral system, but look at, for example, at the IT system, which is critical to elections. We've had the McDonald report in that regard. We have had the Jones report in terms of our human resources system. So it is not unprecedented for GCOM to engage consultants to come and review the operations of our systems so we can improve on those systems.
So now that you have filed this motion, explain the procedure from here on. You filed the motion. What happens next?
Well, we tabled the motion.
You table the motion, yes.
And what they asked for is a written copy of the motion. So that has, in a sense, postponed the finalization to next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, that motion has to be discussed and voted on. And then we will know whether or not GCOM commissioners are disposed to such a motion going forward. So the ball will be in the court, for all intents and purposes, of the chairperson to make that determination. Because we know what the other commissioners would say. Excuse me.
I know I've asked you this question before, but I spoke to former chair, Steve Sorsbally, about his stint and his model of chairmanship. And he said to me, he used this casting vote only once. And that was when you called Boudou attempted to steal the election and he had to use his casting vote. And he said, other than that, he felt that his model, his role as chairman was there to bring consensus, not to use his vote to go with one side or the other. Do you think that model still is a better model than the model of what I call the activist chair, who feels that he has to vote with one side or the other?
It certainly is a better model. But it's not a model that's been adopted post-elections. On every issue post-elections, we've had a casting vote. On every issue. What is worse, in the period of Steve Shrewsbury, he would be actively involved in the discussions. So he would lend his view to the matter, give direction, give advice, and things like that. And then he would move us towards a consensus. We have a system now which is a judge-like system. The chairperson does not participate actively in our discussions. He sits in those discussions to a large extent. And at the end of those discussions, would make a ruling. And worse than that, we've had instances where the ruling was predetermined. Because as the discussion came to an end, she literally lifted from her lap a written ruling that she had written before. So that's the system we have now. We do not have a system that allows for interaction, for points to be made, and for the chairperson to make a judgment based on those points, to indicate which point is stronger or weaker or anything like that. Or even to give her own view on the matter and some direction. No, she listens And then, in a judge-like manner, she pronounces.
Vincent, you floated a couple of weeks ago the use of biometrics as one way of dealing with some of these really difficult problems that is before GCOM. Now you're talking about a review. It seems to me that your side, and I'm saying this, I have sympathy with your side because you represent the side of the aisle that I'm from. Let me make that disclaimer. But it seems to me that your side, over the years, has been trying to find ways and means to deal with some of these difficult problems. That you're not there just to disrupt and complain and all of that kind of thing that I think the other side is engaged in. Um, how does the chair deal with those kinds of thoughtful interventions to deal with difficult problems? Um, does she, and you said she doesn't participate in discussions, but she was a judge. She is a lawyer. Um, is there not an attempt to grapple with these systemic problems that are rooted in our larger sociological problems?
Hardly ever. Hardly ever. Let me give you an example. In response to Rupa, we called for this review and said that this review will allow us to have ideas in terms of initiating legislative reform or legislative amendments. The position has been, look, those matters are matters for the legislature. We don't have to get involved. Imagine being told that GCOM, the body responsible for elections, the body which has the experience in the conduct of elections, is being told from within that it is not our business to make recommendations for legislative reform. That's a matter for the state and for the legislature. And this comes from 4 persons, all of whom are legal practitioners. 4 persons, all of whom are legal practitioners, as opposed to 3 other persons, none of whom is a legal practitioner, though they may have a qualification in the law. And here the legal practitioners say, no, we can't initiate this with the state. And that is highly flawed. Highly flawed. GCOM has in the past, in fact, been party to initiating legislation for the improvement of the electoral system. So what's happening now is completely contradictory to and illogical in relation to what GCOM can do and has done in the past. People seem to come to GCOM with clear instructions. They sometimes criticize and attempt to have a discussion and say it's a waste of their time, and seek to have the chair make her ruling post haste in some instances, and in other instances to have the matter postponed. Like this issue of the review was being postponed repeatedly until we got to 2 meetings ago when we insisted, and then the matter came up. So that we have 3 matters outstanding right now. The review, which he ruled on, but we said we reserve the right to response. And there's that part response in terms of the motion. The question of the voters list, what needs to be done to correct the problem. And it's not a post-election problem. It's a problem that GCOM has discussed since 2007. It's against that background that we went into the question of periodic house registration. That no longer stands, and we say, what do we do to deal with this problem. We're being told, well, the court has ruled that there's nothing much we can do. That is still an outstanding matter for us. And the third outstanding matter is biometrics. Our response initially to biometrics was, we have to do a feasibility study first. And we said, no, 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 no. Let us agree in principle. When we agree in principle, then we could do the feasibility.
Right, right.
But her attempt to shut us down was to say feasibility first. And we said no. So those three matters are still on the table, the review. How do you deal with the bloated list and the introduction of biometrics?
Let me throw something.
Not a style of discourse, of conversation, of interaction. It's a style of, I wish to say listening, but I'm not quite sure she does if she could write a decision in advance. It's a style of pronouncing with some reference sometimes to some law in the art.
Let me throw this into the mix, Vincent. I remember the High Court, the Chief Justice, during the 5 months impasse, saying to GCOM that you have the scope within the context of the Representation of the People's Act and the Elections Amendment Act to do certain things. You have the scope to correct yourself, which led GCOM to Order 60 and so forth. How is it now the Chief Justice is saying, well, we don't have the scope, we think. What's happening here?
That's beyond comprehension. I can't explain that. But I want to make a comment on something that the language people have been using. 5 months impasse. I don't agree it was a 5 month impasse. We spent the greater part of those 5 months doing a recount.
Doing the recount, yes.
A recount is not an impasse.
Right.
We spent a greater part of that time with a recount agreed to and initiated by the two major parties. But now they seek to say that GCOM had them waiting for 5 months. In my own view, there were ways in which GCOM could have done its business without any reference, any deferral to that recount. Unfortunately, we did not do so. But a recount is not an impasse.
Right. You're quite correct.
Simply put on hold an announcement as we sought to do a verification of the poll. And all of us who are along saying that I disagree with that language.
Language matters.
Of an impasse.
Yes.
It then seeks to place blame on one set of people, when in fact the recount was agreed to by both sides, and even the court matters that were heard during that period were not from one side. So you can't blame any one person for the 5 months.
Right.
Collective responsibility for those 5 months.
That's a very, very important observation. The government announced yesterday a commission of inquiry into the elections. No terms of reference have been announced. They just announced the commissioners. Obviously, if you are going to have an inquiry into elections, GCOM would loom large in that inquiry. GCOM would have to say something about how it conducted the election. I am seeing there a linkage between the review, because a commission would want to hear from GCOM how your system worked. Because a lot of what happened during the election and after the election, as you have pointed out, a lot of it has to do with the system. Did the system work? What happened that caused 48 boxes or 40 odd boxes not to have legal documents in them, the required documents? Why people who are not in the country allowed to vote? What's wrong with the system? My understanding is that the Commission of Inquiry would want to hear from GCOM on those things. Am I wrong?
Obviously, Jacob has to be integral to any inquiry. Has to be integral to any inquiry. Because the operations are Jacob operations. And for them to access information on these operations, they have to come largely to GCOM to access that information. But we don't know the terms of reference.
That's
So
right.
we don't know what's the focus of this inquiry. If the inquiry is intended to identify people who've done wrong, then why is it we are pursuing charges against officers of GCOM? That purpose, in many regards, has been preempted by the charges which have been filed against officers and cases which seem to going to last an eternity. Because I think people were charged without them having their so-called evidence to proceed with the cases. So that one really has to see what these terms of reference will say. Are these terms of reference intended merely to vilify people? Or are they intended to identify systemic flaws that can be rectified? We're not sure. So one has to be very, very careful in one's response to this commission inquiry based on the TORs.
Mhm.
That's one aspect. The other aspect is I think that a lot of due diligence has to be done in relation to the commissioners of that commission of inquiry. I always, in that regard, reference the Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry,
Yeah, yeah,
where a judge who visited Guyana, attended a memorial service, made it clear about his disposition as to who was guilty of the death of Walter Rodney. And we are not questioning that at all at this time. But he was very clear on those matters. So he had a predisposition. Excuse me. Then he was brought to be the one to head the commission inquiry. For me, that is conflictual.
yeah.
And so we will have to ensure that due diligence is done. And based on that due diligence, to express our views on those who are members of the commission of inquiry. For example, one may even at this very early moment ask whether or not Justice Carl Singh is the best of choices. And bring into accusations against Justice Carl Singh.
Right, right.
Suffice to say that he was preferred to be the chancellor of the judiciary by the party that now has asked him to sit in judgment on this matter. So we have to be very, very careful about those two things in terms of reference and the composition. And due diligence has to be done, and pronouncements made, and dispositions towards the COI determined based on the findings of those two things.
The Vice President Jack Dio said in a report yesterday or the day before that the commission will find that an attempt was made by the coalition to rig the election. He said that Aubrey North would be subpoenaed to present the opposition statements of poll. Is he a fifth commissioner? Is he aware of the outcome? Is there a pre-trial, a pre-inquiry? How does Mr. Jagdeo know these things? You spend some time in Africa, and you know of the many gods there and so on. What is Jagdeo a god here? What's going on here?
Well, I think that one should see what Jagdeo says as an insider view on the terms of reference.
Of reference.
That's what I would say about those. This issue about the statements of poll of the APNU is the most nonsensical issue that we have around these days.
I want you to elaborate on that. You did so in that very important letter that I ask our readers to read. Elaborate on that.
Statements of poll are intended for the use of political parties for their own purposes. That's what they're intended for. The the government has brought up charges against individuals. They haven't brought the official statements of poll into use in those charges. They went to get they haven't brought the party statements of poll. PDP haven't brought their statements of poll as they pursue these private charges against people. They've gone for GCOM's statement of poll. Those are the official statements of poll. Suffice to say that those statements are no longer of any import in terms of the outcome of the elections. There was a recount. There are replacements for those statements of poll called the recount statements, which do not mirror absolutely what was said to be in the previous statements of poll. But where our elections are concerned, right now, what matters is the recount rather than the original statements of poll, because they were brought into dispute, a recount was done, and they've been overtaken by the recount. So the other statements of poll are relevant. Suffice to say that parties have no obligation to deal with those in the public. They are for their own introspection and retrospection of the elections. The APN, you can go tomorrow and burn them in the public and say, look, we burned these things. And that would not be against any law, because there's no obligation of a party to produce those statements when they are official statements that were signed by the parties and lodged with GCOM. So what is it about the party statements of poll? It's an irrelevancy, and I think it is merely a political maneuver by Jack Neal to stay at war with and to make an issue of the opposition as it is today. But those statements are completely irrelevant. They have no bearing. And even Mr. Norton should never speak about those statements. Those statements should be condemned, except to the rubbish bin, because I think in the petition, it is the recount statements which are being used.
Yeah, yeah.
Those statements have been cancelled by history.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. In the same way that the declarations that were made by the returning officers for the 10 districts were overrun by
in the same manner.
In the same manner. In the same manner. Vincent, you always said, and I don't think people pay much attention. You always said the PPP abdicated their responsibility during that process. That means you always tell us there was a process by which their complaints could have been determined to be correct or not correct, in the same way that when Boudou was attempting to do what he did, and the matter came finally to the level of the commission, you were able to go through and say, no, Mr. Boudou, what you give me is wrong. If they're saying Mingo did something wrong, why did they not allow the process to play itself out, just like Boudou process played itself out? And the commission said, well, wait a minute, Mr. Mingo, you do, this thing is wrong. Just as you were able to say, wait a minute, Mr. Boudou, this thing was wrong. Elaborate on that for me.
There are a number of interesting observations. For whatever reason, in election 2020, GCOM located the District 4 office in the same building with the command center for the election.
Mm-hmm.
That has not normally been the case. The District 4 building is normally somewhere else. That's the first observation I wanted.
Uh-huh.
Secondly, the way in which the system is structured, the districts make their declaration. And very often only with the presence of the agents of the party. This would have occurred in 9 out of 10 districts in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Agents weren't in region 1 to 10-4. Everybody was in region 4. They seemed to have some knowledge that they needed to be in region 4 for whatever purpose. It got so bad that when issues seemed to have arisen in region 4, the PP commissioners abandoned the exercise that the commissioners were involved in, which exercise allowed them to have copies, certified copies of the statements of poll. And those are the most authentic copies you could ever have. For the
Mm-hmm.
reason that they are brought to us, we use an ultraviolet light to ensure that each statement of poll is an original. That doesn't happen in the 10 districts. The only place it happens is at the center. We then sign them to verify that as commissioners, these are authentic. There's no question about them. So that we are literally in possession of the results of the entire election
Mm-hmm.
by virtue of that process. When things seem to have gone awry in Region 4, the PPP nominated commissioners abandoned that exercise to go to join the Rockers, because there's nothing more than less than that in Region 4. And therefore denied not only themselves, but us access to those statements of poll. They were coming to our desks where we assembled, but we were not there to process them and not there to receive them after processing. The result is that we were no longer in a position to contest a result brought by the chief elections officer, which is what the process provides for.
Mm-hmm.
The process provides for the districts to make their declarations, and unlike the view of the public, those declarations are not final. Those declarations are then passed on to the CEO. The CEO, with the documentation he has, can identify those declarations to be incorrect. And even if the CEO doesn't do that, when he compiles those declarations and they're brought to the commission, we can determine that they're not correct. So that any wickedness may go right up top. If it had gone through the system, there are sufficient controls in the system for it to have been picked up at various levels, the final level being the level of the commission. The commission, however, denied itself that opportunity by not being recipients of the statements that would allow them to know what the figures should have been. And so there is where the system did not work. And the commissions have to take responsibility for that because they're the ones who abandon their function to go to a place where normally commissioners are not assembly, where commissioners do not have a role to play, to be involved in shouting matches and protests and all sorts of things, whilst their function was not being carried out. That resulted in us not being able to get to the point long before 5 months where a result could have been brought, contested, and rectified. And nobody wants to take responsibility for that.
Nobody wants to take responsibility for that. Vincent Alexander here walking us through the situation there at GCOM, where the chairperson has announced that she does not think that GCOM is in a position to do she didn't say a review, but that was what was requested, a review of the elections to determine whether the system worked, where it worked, where it didn't work. And the opposition commissioners, opposition appointed commissioners, are pursuing the matter. They have tabled a motion, which is going to be discussed next week. And Vincent here has been giving us his insights on what's happening there. And of course, now we have the announcement of this commission by the government. And that will have some bearing on what's happening at GCOM. I noticed the lawyers, for those who were charged, waiting today that they have to meet with their clients to determine. The PPP has said it is not discontinuing the charges. Jack Dio had originally said that they weren't going to go after a commission of inquiry because he suggested that it could have some impact on those who were charged, or those who were charged. Those charges could have some impact on the inquiry. You care to weigh in on the relationship between the charges that were brought against those GCOM people and this commission of inquiry?
Well, like I said, the commission of inquiry, those are the terms of reference.
The terms of reference, yes, we go right back.
That's critical for one to make an informed comment. But certainly, one could see an inquiry being an instrument for vilification in circumstances where the charges fall flat.
Yeah.
Because the commission of inquiry is the lowest judicial standard. It allows hearsay, all sorts of things which a court of law would not do. So you can have a commission of inquiry coming out with a report that vilifies individuals, but does not meet the legal standard for the determination of guilt. So that this commission of inquiry could well be a fallback position for the purposes of verification. And if it does so before the cases are heard, then I wonder, how do we see the question of the court being exposed to all of these statements whilst it is not yet
or
the cases? I think one would talk about matters being sub judice. Isn't this the case where you are officially removing that rule that should apply when matters are before the court?
When matters before the court. Vincent Alexander. Vincent, as we wrap up here, anything that you want to introduce, want to say that I didn't ask you and that you think is important in this discussion?
Well, the only point I want to make is that while all of this is going on, we seem to be moving slowly but steadily towards a local government election, which is likely to be affected by the matters to be determined. And so, really, we should not be entertaining an election at a time when we have not identified the flaws in our system and therefore are in no position to rectify them for the conduct of another election.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that there is Well, thank you very much, Vincent, for coming on tonight and um, giving your insight on these very important matters. We are in very, very crucial times in our country. We seem to have here the convergence of all the forces. Um, Matters to do with election, matters to do with integrity and corruption, matters to do with extrajudicial killing, or all, as they say, the wrath is coming down on Guyana. But as I always like to say, when you take away the normal checks and balances on a government and you allow a government free rein, government by their very definition, when you allow them free rein, you're bound to end up with all these colliding forces. But I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your insight here tonight. And next week, when that motion is being debated, we hope that we can get you to come back and spend a few minutes telling us how things go there. Thank you much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Vincent Alexander there, coming on and helping us through. I want to thank all of you. Today there were two protests in Georgetown. The Golden Grove people came down to town, close family and members. The little son and his mother were there, and they had a demonstration in front of the police headquarters at Ivleri, and another one in front of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And then across town, in front of the office of the president, there was another demonstration organized by the PNC to protest against the Sue-gate, Mr. Sue and Mr. Jagdeo story. So there were a couple of protests. As I always say, we've been calling for boots on the ground, and there are boots on the ground, and we have to support. We have to join those protests. Those of you on the East Coast, please find yourself down there to a Golden Grove, Nabaklis, Haslington area, and give some solidarity to that family and that community. The funeral is going to be on Sunday, and there'll be activities leading up to that funeral. And that funeral should be a time for mourning, a time for celebration of the life of young Bacchus, but it's also a time for us to show that we are not beaten down and that we are serious about this movement to stop this galloping dictatorship. So keep your eyes out for protests whenever they're called, sometimes at short notice, and try to join them. Build our numbers, build our movement. Tonight is a beautiful night, a beautiful evening. I'm here in Buxton, where my village, where I was born, and it's always good to be the place. I'm here in Guyana, our beautiful Guyana, our country too. Guyana is for all of us. And I want to thank you all tonight. We got down to 85% full. I was watching, you're 85% full tonight. So we fall short by 15%. But we're gonna make up tomorrow night. Tomorrow night I'm pursuing a number of guests. And hopefully we will get one of them to come on tomorrow night. We were trying to get a couple of lawyers. I've been trying to engage the opposition leader to see if he's going to be able to come on and spend a couple of minutes with us tomorrow night. But we promised to have a big show tomorrow night. Look out for the announcement during the day of the lineup. I want to thank everyone for being so loyal to Politics 101. You are loyal to us. We are loyal to you. We are building this movement. We are building this movement. We are building this movement because there is power in movement. We are building this movement. It's a movement to get rid of dictatorship that after this dictatorship, we should not have to deal with any more dictatorship in our Guyana. We have to have a movement that wipe the face of Guyana clean of dictatorship. We've got to remove this government from office. Every day, this government is shaming us, this government is oppressing us, this government is starving us, and this government is not a good government. And we have to replace this government with a government that is the model of what governments should be. The model of what governments should be. After 2 years is too much with this kind of stuff that has been going on under this PPP regime. We cannot live for another 3 years under this kind of arrangement. Good night. Good evening. Thanks to all of you. I notice we have had some visitors tonight. I like when they come because they just learn things. You know, they just inbox me. I heard from Philip Simeon. I heard from Dio Arjun. They all tell me that we come here to work for the PPP, but Dr. Hinds, you're a real teacher. You teach us there are things we learn here that had we not come on this program. Here is Philip Simeon is saying, Dr. Hinds, the PPP sent me to spy on your program, but I am learning things here tonight that I never knew before. Dio Arjun says that I have to make a living. The PPP sends us on these programs to cause confusion, but instead we end up learning a few things. God bless you, Dr. That is from Dio Arjun. Thank you, Mr. Arjun. I know you're giving my viewers lots of hello there, but thank you for those. Thank you for that message. Keep coming back and keep learning. Good night, everyone. I'm seeing you all tomorrow night for a special program. Bye-bye.